in Anaheim, California, for a cable industry trade show.
Next, a discussion of events in Indonesia and East Timor, which is seeking autonomy. We'll hear from Indonesian ambassador to the U.S., Arifin Siregar. His remarks to the National Press Club last an hour and 10 minutes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for coming. Welcome to the National Press Club and another NPC Morning Newsmaker. My name is Peter Hickman. I'm Vice Chairman of the club's Newsmaker Committee and a freelance writer and editorial and media consultant. Before introducing this morning's Newsmaker, I'd like to call your attention to some material on the table outside which you might find of interest concerning today's Newsmaker, and also a list of other speakers and events we have scheduled here at the Press Club which we hope you might be interested in. Today, as you know, we are pleased to have as our newsmaker the Ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to the United States, His Excellency Dr. Arifin M. Siregar. Mr. Ambassador, welcome. Selamat datang. We're very glad to have you with us today. I also want to thank my colleague and my friend, Minister Councilor Hupudio Supadi of the Indonesian Embassy, for suggesting and helping arrange this morning's newsmaker. And I want to welcome Mrs. Siregar, the ambassador's wife, and also the former U.S. ambassador to Indonesia, Paul Wolfowitz, now with Director of SAIS. Arifin Siregar is from the city of Medan in the northern part of the Indonesian island of Sumatra. He received his higher education in the Netherlands and Germany. His PhD in economics is from Munster University, and it was magna cum laude. In his professional career, Ambassador Siregar has been a United Nations Economic Affairs Officer in New York and in Beirut. He also was an economic officer with the International Monetary Fund here in Washington and IMF resident representative in Vientiane, Laos, where he also was financial advisor to the Lao government. He was governor of the Central Bank of Indonesia, and from 1988 to 1993, immediately before coming here as ambassador, he was Indonesia's Minister of Trade. In that capacity, he led the Indonesian delegation to the GATT-Uruguay round in negotiations, which means you must be keeping a close eye on things in Singapore these days. Well, as many of you probably know, I know some of you were here a little more than a month ago. Our National Press Club morning newsmaker was José Ramos Horta, co-laureate of the 1996 Nobel Peace Prize, which is being awarded today. Mr. Horta is from the Indonesian island and former Portuguese colony of East Timor. At that time, Mr. Horta talked about whether East Timor would remain part of Indonesia or attempt to determine its own political future, and the conflict the island has with Jakarta on that issue. And you might have noticed in the New York Times this morning there is an op-ed piece by his co-laureate, Bishop Bello. This morning, Ambassador Siregar is going to address this same issue, focusing on his government's effort to find an internationally acceptable solution to the situation. His topic, as you know, is to know Indonesia and the problem of East Timor better. After he speaks, Ambassador Siregar will take your questions, and we ask that you please identify yourself by name and affiliation when you ask them. And when you do have a question at any time during the news conference, if you'll give me a signal, I'll call on you in turn and as many of you as time permits. And finally, if you didn't sign in on the way in, please sign out on the way out. Thank you very much, Ambassador Siregar.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and thank you for being here today. I'm happy to be here to talk with you about my country and the question of East Timor. I would also like to thank the National Press Club and especially you, Mr. Hickman, for the kind invitation to meet with you. As many of you know, Indonesia is spread over an archipelago of 17,000 islands with over 200 million people, 300 ethnic groups, and over 500 local languages and dialects. But one thing that unites all Indonesians is our common history as a young nation and our relatively recent struggles for freedom following centuries of colonial rule. And so, while we are proud of our diversity, We also carefully protect our unity, for it is this unity that has helped Indonesia achieve the progress we enjoy today. Prior to 1967, Indonesia, with per capita income of only $70, was among the poorest countries in the world. About 60% of our population lived below the poverty level, and life expectancy was only 45 years. Inflation was rampant, and infrastructure facilities were woefully inadequate. An important change came in 1967 when the new government of President Suharto instituted policies designed to preserve political stability and foster sustained growth. Inflation, which reached nearly 650% in 1966, was brought under control, and a free foreign exchange system was introduced. Infrastructure facilities such as transportation, irrigation, and power were improved and expanded. Significant investment was made in human resource development, particularly in education and training. Moreover, a high priority was given to the development of agriculture, on which about 75% of the population depended for their living. Beginning in the early 1980s, government intervention in the economy was significantly reduced through extensive deregulation, which continues today. Indonesia's enterprises were exposed to international competition, and our philosophy shifted to export-oriented growth, especially in the non-oil products area. A number of steps were taken to make Indonesia's economy more efficient and competitive. Subsidies and import restrictions were progressively reduced or abolished. A more realistic exchange rate policy was adopted, along with extensive fiscal and banking reforms. As a result, Indonesia moved from an economy that was heavily dependent on oil to one largely driven by non-oil activities and exports. In 1983, our oil and gas industry contributed up to 80% of export earnings and 70% of government revenues. By 1994, these figures were reduced to 24% and 22% respectively. In 1995, non-oil products comprised more than 75% of total exports, compared with only 20% 12 years ago. Real GDP growth has averaged between 6 and 7% annually over the last 25 years, rising to 8% last year. Per capita GDP reached $1,000 in 1995, up from $70 some 25 years ago. The number of Indonesians living below the poverty level has declined to 14% from 60%, while life expectancy rose from 45 years to 63 years during the same period. My country also evolved from the world's largest importer of rice to self-sufficiency in 1984. Conservative fiscal and monetary policies confined inflation to single-digit levels. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot talk about Indonesia's economic development without mentioning the role of the United States. The development of trade and economic relations between the United States and Indonesia has paralleled our economic progress. U.S. investment, particularly in the oil and gas sector, but also in mining and minerals, help our country grow. Our bilateral trade and economic relationship has expanded continuously. Two-way trade between our countries more than doubled between 1989 to 1995, reaching $10.8 billion in 1995. It is therefore understandable that the United States Department of Commerce designated Indonesia as one of the 10 big emerging markets for U.S. exporters. Based on approved projects, U.S. cumulative investment in Indonesia has reached $11.5 billion, excluding domestic investment by U.S. companies in the oil and gas sector. Our economic relationship with the United States reaches far beyond bilateral trade and investment, however. Indonesia actively participated in the Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiations. As a founding member of the World Trade Organization, we look forward to continuing cooperation with the United States in making that organization work. And then there is APEC. I believe that the leadership of the United States and Indonesia in the last several years has forged the future of this important organization. The United States set the scene by hosting the first APEC leaders meeting in Seattle in 1993. As host of the second leaders meeting, Indonesia was able to move the process forward by convincing all APEC leaders to adopt the Bogor Declaration, which aims to establish free and open trade and investment in the Asia-Pacific region in the beginning of the 21st century. In addition to our trade and economic relationship, we also share common strategic objectives in the political, defense, and security fields. These have grown from the regional focus of early years and are reflected not just in our day-to-day bilateral dealings, but also multilaterally. Politically, my country has adopted an increasingly important role internationally in areas of interest to the United States. Indonesia co-chaired the Cambodian peace process, and as chair of the non-aligned movement, has charted a course for the non-alignment movement, which aims to move from the traditionally confrontational North-South divisiveness to mutually beneficial cooperation between the North and the South. Indonesia supported the Middle East peace process and has played an important role in the U.S. peacekeeping operations, including those in Cambodia. Although we are in the so-called post-Cold War era, we still have concerns about the economic and military growth of some countries in the Asian region and feel the United States should continue to play a balancing role. Indonesia's peacekeeping efforts will continue. One example of these efforts is the observers we have sent to Bosnia to support peace there. Nuclear non-proliferation will continue to be a goal of both our countries, and we will continue our cooperation on this important issue. In this connection, Indonesia has been supporting international efforts in North Korea by contributing to the Korean Peninsula Energy Development Organization, or KIDO. My country has also attempted to play a mediating role for the many countries, including China, which claim sovereignty over the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea, something that is of vital importance to U.S. defense and security interests in the region. Furthermore, Indonesia's role as a facilitator between the Moro Liberation Front and the Philippines has led to a recently concluded peace agreement. In terms of regional security, Indonesia and the United States are engaged in the new ASEAN Regional Forum, which is focused on security. Access arrangements with Southeast Asian nations are vitally important in ensuring that the United States retains its stabilizing security role in the region. In that regard, the United States has been offered the services of a shipyard in Surabaya for the maintenance and repair of U.S. naval ships. The United States has also had an important role in educating Indonesia's future business and political leaders. At present, there are some 18,000 Indonesian students enrolled in your universities. This can only help reinforce understanding between our two nations and make for an improved appreciation of each other's values and, at times, constraints. Ladies and gentlemen, despite the progress we have made, we have a long way to go. Our per capita GNP is still low by most standards, and we are working to meet that challenge and continue our progress. Indonesia's political situation, like yours, has evolved from a unique history and a diverse culture. unique in particular when you consider that we are a country consisting of thousands of islands, hundreds of ethnic groups, and hundreds of local languages and dialects. Significant changes in our society have paralleled our rapid economic development. There is now an expanding middle class in Indonesia as a result of the substantial economic growth over the past 25 years. This growing middle class of tens of millions has new priorities and constitutes an important force for positive change throughout our nation. Such a process of change should be allowed to develop naturally and must not be imposed from abroad. That will be counterproductive. To succeed, our system must evolve in its own way and at its own pace. And this process, I can assure you, is well underway. While Indonesia has achieved significant economic progress in each of its 27 provinces, the province of East Timor has benefited substantially from these developments. East Timor's economic progress, however, is only one dimension of the province's complex history. In order to comprehend East Timor and its future, one must understand its past. On April the 25th, 1974, the Portuguese military overthrew the civilian government, and the military, under the leadership of General Antonio de Spinola, took control of Portugal. About a month later, Spinola declared Portugal's intention to decolonize all of its so-called overseas territories, including East Timor. 12 days later, permission was given by Portugal for the people of East Timor to organize 5 political parties and begin the process that was to culminate in a March 1975 referendum with 3 choices. 1, to become an autonomous territory under Portuguese rule. 2, to become an independent country. And 3, to join the Republic of Indonesia at its 27th province. Indonesia's President Suharto assured all parties that even though it shared the island of Timor with this Portuguese colony, Indonesia has no territorial claim to East Timor, and that it would follow any decision by the East Timorese regarding their future. In the year that followed through, though, Portugal's plans went awry. First, Fretilin, a radical minority party which favored immediate independence, began a campaign of terror against members of the other 4 political parties. This violence led to talks in London between senior Portuguese and Indonesian officials aimed at restoring some calm to the territory. In July 1975, well after the scheduled referendum date passed and amid much bickering, Portugal ordered the formation of a transitional East Timor government to prepare for an October 1976 election. The resulting Popular Assembly would take responsibility for determining the status of the territory. Of the 5 political parties formed prior to Portugal's planned orderly departure, only Fretilin refused to cooperate in a democratic process to decide the future of East Timor. This refusal and Fretilin's terrorist activities led to a bloody civil war which erupted in August 1975, pitting Fretilin against the 4 other parties. At times, fighting included guerrilla and artillery attacks which spilled across the border into Indonesian West Timor. As the fighting spread and tens of thousands of East Timorese fled to the Indonesian West Timor, Portuguese officials on East Timor summarily packed their bags and fled the island, leaving their weapons to Fretilin. This flight left a total power vacuum in the colony, leading to increased bloodshed. Ladies and gentlemen, Sadly, many lives were lost because of the civil war and the resulting living conditions, including famine. But equally disturbing are the allegations surrounding the number of lives lost. According to Professor H.W. Arndt of the Research School of the Australian National University, the number of lives that were tragically lost due to the civil war and the resulting malnutrition and disease is far lower than the figure of 200,000 that is frequently cited by the Portuguese government and Fretilin. I want to make it clear that the lack of agricultural and health care services that led to much of the loss of life was the direct result of colonial neglect. Through the decolonization process, Indonesia had supported the efforts of the new government of Portugal to decolonize East Timor. In fact, at Portugal's request, Indonesia extended its active cooperation to the process through a series of meetings held between the representatives of both countries in 1974 and 1975 in New York, Lisbon, London, Jakarta, and Rome. At the November 1975 Rome meeting, thus 3 months after Portugal fled East Timor and after civil war had erupted, Indonesia again urged Portugal to return and complete its decolonization in a just and orderly manner. But Portugal did not return to East Timor. However, though fleeing the territory, Portugal proclaimed itself the administering power in East Timor, while again refusing to send any troops to East Timor to restore peace and security. In November 1975, in the middle of the Civil War, Fretilin unilaterally issued a declaration of independence of East Timor. 2 days later, the other 4 political parties, representing the majority of the people of East Timor, issued a proclamation of independence from Portugal and simultaneously called for integration with Indonesia. On December the 7th, East Timor's capital of Dili was retaken from Fretilin, and 10 days later, the provisional government of East Timor, comprised of East Timorese leaders from the 4 parties, was formed. Although it was not mandatory, both Indonesia and the East Timor provisional government invited the UN to send envoys to the territory in order to supervise the process of self-determination. Unfortunately, the UN did not respond, presumably because of the reluctance to take any major action to insert itself into the problem that Portugal had created in East Timor. Finally, on May the 31st, 1976, the popularly elected People's Assembly of East Timor formally requested that the government of Indonesia accept a request for integration. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last 20 years, some have criticized Indonesia's record in East Timor. We freely admit that Indonesia's record is not without mistakes. But viewed within East Timor's 450 years history of Portuguese colonial neglect, and taking into account Indonesia's efforts to correct its errors, it is clear that East Timor is much better off today than it was in over 4 centuries of Portuguese rule. As part of Indonesia's efforts, a branch office of the National Human Rights Commission was opened in East Timor last summer, which independently investigates all reports of human rights violations. In a developing country as large as Indonesia, with a heterogeneous population of over 200 million, human rights violations, unfortunately, do occur. As in many industrialized countries, these occurrences do not reflect government policy. In fact, our government is actively combating them to protect and enhance the rights of all our citizens. Indonesia provides not only the same support for East Timor as for each of its 27 provinces, it provides more. Efforts of the East Timorese and their local and state governments have resulted in an annual economic growth rate of 10%, thus much higher than that found in other Indonesian provinces. East Timor's per capita income has increased 8-fold since the departure of the Portuguese, and we allocate per capita 6 times more financial resources to East Timor than to any of our other provinces. Why, you would ask? Well, first, these resources were sorely needed in this province. But more important, they serve as proof of our commitment to providing the infrastructure and support necessary to improve the quality of life of all the people of East Timor. But Indonesia has not only dramatically improved East Timor's economic infrastructure, we have also preserved and encouraged religious diversity there, as in all our provinces. The result is an 8-fold growth of churches on East Timor and a rise in the percentage of Catholics in the population from only 29% in the time of Portugal's abandonment to 92% today. This growth is representative of Indonesia's constitutional commitment to freedom of worship for all religions throughout our nation. As in East Timor, this commitment is reflected in all our provinces, including Bali, for example, where the overwhelming majority of the population of 3 million is comprised of Hindus who have kept their religious practices and cultural traditions undisturbed and in harmonious cooperation with their Christian, Buddhist, and Muslim compatriots. Indonesia's commitment to improving the quality of life of the people of East Timor extends beyond religious freedom. Before integration, East Timor had only 2 hospitals and 14 health clinics. Today, there are 11 hospitals and 332 village health centers. Only 47 elementary schools, 2 junior high schools, and 1 senior high school existed when Portugal abandoned East Timor. In fact, East Timor had no higher learning institutions at all. Today, every East Timorese child attends school. There are 715 elementary schools, 114 junior high schools, 58 senior high schools, and 4 higher education centers, including the University of East Timor. Through the United States Agency for International Development, 2 professors from Georgetown University are teaching at this university. As Indonesia remains determined to enhance the welfare of the people of East Timor and to ensure that they live in peace and in an atmosphere of religious freedom and tolerance, our commitment is equal in finding a solution to the remaining questions. The record shows that Indonesia has been committed to working with the UN Secretary General through ongoing diplomatic efforts since 1983 between Indonesia and Portugal, aimed at resolving this issue, the tripartite dialogue. The talks have yielded progress. In fact, the UN Secretary General has twice proposed major steps towards an internationally acceptable solution in 1987 and 1991, to which Indonesia agreed, but which Portugal flatly rejected. Fortunately, in 1992, the talks resumed, and the latest meeting is scheduled later this month in New York between Indonesia's and Portugal's Ministers of Foreign Affairs. Indonesia remains a willing participant in the talks and is committed to finding a just, comprehensive, and internationally acceptable solution to the question of East Timor. Indonesia has also been supporting reconciliatory meetings among the various factions of the East Timorese residing both inside and outside East Timor. This led to the creation of the all-inclusive Intra-East Timorese Dialogue, or AIETD, facilitated by the UN Secretary General and held in Austria in June 1995 and March 1996. Ladies and gentlemen, given all these efforts aimed at peaceful solution, it was especially difficult to understand the reasoning behind this year's Nobel Peace Prize. While Bishop Bellow's award for all his efforts aimed at preserving peace on East Timor was certainly understandable, people throughout Indonesia cannot comprehend the award to Ramos Horta, a founding member of the Fretilin Party. Bishop Bellow himself has publicly condemned the brutality of the brief rule of Fretilin on East Timor. With the Nobel Prize, there has been talk of a referendum in East Timor. From a historical standpoint, a referendum at this point would not only constitute a betrayal of the wishes of a majority, whose vote came at a time when Fretilin's terror and the resulting civil war were fresh in their minds, but also proved very dangerous. Former U.S. Ambassador to Indonesia, Robert Berry, who is also present among us today, recently wrote that Italian, Spanish, German, and Portuguese missionaries with whom he traveled to East Timor warned that Indonesian withdrawal would trigger large-scale bloodshed in settling old scores between East Timorese factions. Further, Bishop Bellow himself, in his pastoral letter of August 1994, took the position that the referendum in East Timor would lead to renewed civil war in the province. Clearly, no one, however well-intentioned, wants a return to civil war in East Timor. While the Nobel Prize has focused a spotlight on Indonesia and the issue of East Timor, I hope today that I've been able to shed a little more light on East Timor history and colonial abandonment. I also hope that I have shown how the East Timorese have participated in our nation's progress in raising the quality of life of all 200 million Indonesians. The challenge now is not to continue revising history, but for all who truly care about East Timor's future to join together in continuing the progress that began there 20 years ago and continue the diplomatic efforts being led by the United Nations Secretary General. I thank you for your attention.
Mr. Siregar, thank you very much. Before we go to questions, I want to apologize for not introducing Ambassador Berry, but I don't think I know who he is, but he's here. Would you raise your hand, Ambassador? Thank you very much. My apologies.
There's another Ambassador Master. There's another former U.S. Ambassador to Indonesia, Ambassador Master.
Ambassador Masters, yes. Well, no excuse there, I do know you. We're open for questions now. Would you please give your name and affiliation when you ask them? Who's first? Yes, sir.
SIC Television of Portugal. Minister Ali Alatas said a couple of days ago that the Nobel Peace Prize to Mr. Ramos Horta and Bishop Bellow may provoke more problems in East Timor. Would you like to care? Do you care to comment on what the minister meant with that?
I didn't aware of those remarks. What we hope in Indonesia is that also this Nobel Prize award will lead to more intensive talks between Portugal and Indonesia under the auspices of the United States Secretary General. As you know, as I mentioned also in my speech, these negotiations have been going on, and there are indications that they could lead to acceptable solution in the future.
The laureates have also called for a ceasefire, or for a withdrawal of the military presence, or reduction of the military presence of Indonesia in East Timor. And the armed wing of the resistance said they're ready for a ceasefire. Would your government welcome that?
Well, what is important is, of course, to have a comprehensive peace negotiation. Like I said, this negotiation started already a couple of years ago under the auspices of the UN Secretary General, and we would like to continue that and to take all aspects of the problem into consideration.
Yes, ma'am.
Tracy Walton, in the editorial today in the New York Times, Carlos Bello says that there are still many East Timorese who are imprisoned and face widespread human rights violations by the Indonesian government specifically. In your presentation, you underplayed that. Could you respond to some of the claims that he makes in that editorial?
As I mentioned in my speech, our record is not without mistakes, not without errors. There are some violations of human rights, but we considered our task to correct these possible violations. We had these incidents in Delhi. Unfortunately, it happened with many casualties, and those who were responsible were brought to trial, and they got sentences. And we learned from our mistakes. Like I mentioned before, it is our task, not only of the government, but the whole population, to see to it these violations do not occur. And as I mentioned also before, we have established a branch of the Human Rights Commission in East Timor. And the Human Rights Commission has come up with a number of findings, which sometimes deviate from those of the official ones. And I think they have done a very good job, and that is another indication of our commitment to improve our record of human rights.
Yes, sir.
Please, sir.
My name is Ernie Bao, President of the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. Mr. Ambassador, I wonder if you could comment on the role of foreign direct investment in Indonesia's economic development, and possibly in East Timor, and specifically if you might comment on American foreign direct investment in Indonesia. I guess the U.S. companies are a little bit concerned that the debate in this country seems to focus on American companies' negative role, and I'm not clear, we still haven't been able to clarify what that is, but we here in Indonesia that we play a very positive role in the transfer of technology, training people, in economic development, and I just wonder, I guess my surmise is that we actually have American companies play a positive role, but I'd like to have your comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Well, for sure, American companies have played a very important role in investment, in particular in the oil and gas sector. In fact, American investments dominate the whole scene in that area. It dates back to at least 30-40 years ago. In addition, in the non-oil area, there have been increasing investment by American investors as well. And what is important in this respect is to point out that there is a narrow, or let's say close relationship between investment and trade. Your investment there that also to increase trade between our two countries. Take, for example, a lot of companies in Indonesia which need a lot of machinery from the United States. And also our airline company, which needs also a lot of parts from American companies in the United States. And we are glad that Americans have increased also the investment in the non-oil sector. As I mentioned in my speech, up to 1995, cumulative investments of American companies in non-oil sector amounted to $11.5 billion. And we are now in the process of expanding the infrastructure development, telecommunication, transportation. And I think American companies can play a very important role indeed in supplying all the equipment to Indonesia. This is also one of the reasons why the U.S. Department of Commerce designated Indonesia as one of the 10 big emerging markets. And we welcome American companies because we would like to have, let's say, a balance in the composition of foreign investors in Indonesia. we would like to see that not only one country dominates the whole scene, but that other countries have an equal weight in the importance of their presence in Indonesia.
This gentleman behind you, Mr. Besar.
Peter Wilson from the Australian newspaper. You mentioned the assessment of several people that a referendum could lead to new civil war, perhaps, in East Timor. I was wondering, does the government of Indonesia share that perception, that the rule of civil law there is still so fragile that a referendum could lead to new bloodshed?
Yeah, we think that a referendum could lead a lot of problems, because as I mentioned before, we have to look to history, what happened. There was a civil war before we were asked to help the 4 political parties out of the 5. And we are afraid that there are still problems among the various factions. That's why also we have supported what I call the all-inclusive East Timorese dialogue, which aims at resolving the problems which exist among themselves. If we have a referendum now, and we are afraid that these people will settle old scores, which could lead to another civil war.
Next question. Yes, Al.
Gene Kramer, Associated Press. Do you and your government think its image is positively or negatively affected in the United States by the existence of conspicuously large financial contributions to American political parties by wealthy Indonesians or Indonesian Americans or binationals or whoever they are?
Well, first of all, this is a private thing. Let's say a relationship between some Indonesians and, let's say, a political party here or some people in the United States. I would like to mention to you that the Indonesian government has nothing to do with all these contributions.
Yes, sir.
Follow up to that question. There have been reports that Mr. Riyadi, I think the New York Times, was some kind of informal go-between between the administration and your government on the question of East Timor.
For sure, it is not true. It would be an insult to the Indonesian ambassador to the United States to use other people, to pursue our goals. Of course, some people would like to claim that, but I don't think that it is true.
The New York Times report was wrong?
I don't want to say wrong, but I would like to say that we have never used the services of the Riyadi family to promote our cause in the United States. We have our own people,
Did he ever volunteer to help in any way? You know how common informal channels are.
Well, that is, I don't know about that, but for sure, the Indonesian government has never used the services of a private people, be there Mukhtar Riyadi or whoever, to promote our interest here in the United States. We have our government people,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Arifin Siregar, while Indonesia government spend much money for East Timor development, why until now the integration process East Timor to Indonesia is not smoothly? I mean, there are so many riots, so many demonstrations to Indonesian government. So what the main problem on?
For sure, it's like, as you know, in every country you have some people who are not satisfied with the situation. And probably they belong to the so-called vocal minority. And we have to admit that there is some dissatisfaction, like in many provinces of Indonesia. One of them is the problem of employment. As you know, we have built a number of schools in East Timor, and we have given the opportunity of many of our competitors of East Timor to have better education and training on the island of Java. They have returned to East Timor with high expectations with regard to jobs, employment, but probably they were disappointed, and this led to a dissatisfaction. And as you know, unfortunately, in the whole of Indonesia, we have this unemployment problem. Despite the progress we have made in the economic field, we have an unemployment problem, not only in East Timor, but also in other provinces. And these people probably are rather impatient. And that is one of the causes of the dissatisfaction on East Timor.
Yes, ma'am.
Ann Miller, University of Kansas. I have two related questions. Is it the position of your government that the people of East Timor are the same suku bangsa as the people of West Timor?
First of all, yes. As you know, the island of Timor consists of two parts. The western part has always belonged to Indonesia. It was part of the former Netherlands East Indies. They are the same people. And if you talk about people, we have at least 300 ethnic groups. And the East Timorese, they are on the same islands, you know. They speak the same language, and so it was only colonial history which separated us from each other.
Then I have a following question. As you know, from 1950 to 1960, the father of Indonesia, former President Sukarno, at each Independence Day speech, talked about Irian and declared that Indonesia, the whole of Indonesia, was from Sabang to Merauke. Did it ever occur to him, do you know, or to anyone, to consider talking at any time about similar incorporation of East Timor?
Never, no. Never. Because what we would like to liberate from the Dutch for colonial master was the former Netherlands East Indonesia, Netherlands East Indies, excluding East Timor. That's why we have never had, we have never claimed East Timor. It was the East Timorese who asked us to intervene in 1975.
Peter? Over here, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could tell us how the US-Indonesian business, sorry, not business council, is it the Friendship Society headed by Ambassador Wolfowitz? I wonder how that's going and whether you think that's going to be an important new force for representing the Indonesian government here.
Well, as you know, in this country, there are a number of associations which are designed to promote cultural, economic, political relations between the United States and that country, whether it is in the case of Japan, Brazil, and other countries. And only in about 2 years ago, some Indonesians and American people came to the conclusion that it would be a good idea also to start to have such an association. The primary purpose is to improve or to foster relations in the political, economic, cultural field. And it is not a lobbying organization, not at all. The purpose is, like I said, to improve the relations, to expand the relations between the people of the United States and the people of Indonesia.
Yes.
Follow-up question, Mr. Ambassador. There was testimony about 8-9 months ago on U.S.-Indonesia relations, and Ambassador Wolfowitz at the time made some comments on recommendations to our country on how we could be a positive force for continuing evolution in the political sense and also, I guess, economic in Indonesia. And I think he's here. He probably might want to clarify anything I say, but I wondered if you'd have a recommendation about, you know, how American foreign policy could be a constructive force. I think we kind of agree on the goals, but is there something that you could recommend to Americans on process? How can we be a constructive force and use the friendship to have influence that I think American foreign policy wants to have in Indonesia? I wonder what you would comment on or recommend as advice there.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Bauer. First of all, I would like to emphasize that Indonesia is very grateful to the United States for helping us during our struggle for independence from 45 to 49. It was particularly the Americans who put pressure on the Dutch to negotiate with us. And since then, we have enjoyed good relations, real relations, even though now and then there were problems. And lately, we have to tell you that there are some say, reservation in Indonesia about the way in which you would like to pursue your foreign policy towards Indonesia. We understand that your government here has to take into account the wishes of some people, the NGOs, whether it is about human rights and many other things. What we would like to see is we are open to discussing any aspect of our relationship. But of course, as two independent nations, like I said, we would like to learn from you, but not to be dictated by you, whether it is in the case of human rights, worker rights, and other things. And we would like to be involved, engaged constructively, without, giving a lot of publicity that we have done it wrong and that we should do this, we should do that. That is, I think, not a very healthy relationship. But I have to tell you that apparently now the United States government has realized that, and we see changes in the approaches. And as far as the U.S. business community is concerned, of course, we hope that the good cooperation between your people and Indonesia will continue in the future. And like I said, in the case of investment or trade, we hope that America will play an increasingly important role in our development efforts. We welcome that very much indeed. And we know that American companies usually also would like to transfer knowledge while working together with our people. And we appreciate that very much indeed. That's why we have been sending a lot of missions, as you know, to the United States, trade and investment missions, in order to make American people aware of the opportunities in Indonesia, and from our part, to make Indonesians also aware of the possibilities of doing business with your people. On the whole, I must say that the relations between the United States and Indonesia have been very good. There are always problems, of course, between two countries, and we want to resolve the problems amicably.
Mr. Siregar, before we go to the next question, since Ambassador Wolfowitz's name has been brought up a couple of times, would you like to
please
share the floor with him if he would like to say anything?
I would have to.
You don't have to.
Let me just say, and I'm speaking as a former representative of the U.S. government in the following comment. The ambassador is a representative of his government. We have had, through the good relations between our countries, very open dialogue about a very wide range of sensitive issues. I remember when I was ambassador, it came to our attention that the mother of a leading figure in Fretilin felt that she was being denied permission to leave East Timor because she thought, trying to punish her son. I don't know the facts. I do know that when we approached authorities in Jakarta about this, and shortly afterwards she was given an exit visa. I think Indonesian government has always been open to discussion of sensitive issues. Ambassador Masters did it when he was there as my predecessor. Ambassador Barry did it afterwards. I think the important point is that it's Indonesians who decide what goes on in Indonesia. But I think as long as we have good relations, they have been very open to hearing the American point of view. And I think, your question was how can the United States influence? I don't think it's fair to ask the Indonesian ambassador how we can influence. But I would just say I think we have a very important influence, and I think we've exercised it quite effectively.
Ambassador Barry, any comments on this?
No, I endorse what Ambassador Wolfowitz has said. I think that the dialogue has been a constructive one. And I would stress that I think Indonesia has changed a great deal over the last 10 or 20 years. It is very much a society in transition, economically, socially, and politically. And I think our role is to constructively try to reinforce those trends and not to dictate them.
I would just, if I could just add a point to that, I certainly have no disagreement with U.S. policy toward Indonesia, but I do sometimes have problems with the style with which we try to implement that policy. While I was ambassador, there was a major problem of a number of detainees being held in Indonesia. We worked with them, others did. We worked quietly behind the scenes, and as a result, in a quite short period of time, all of those detainees were released. And I'm convinced on the basis of that and my long experience with Indonesia But the best thing to do is to work with them, not confront them, and to try to find common ground where we can work out these issues.
Are there any other former American ambassadors? So raise your hand. If not, we'll go to Reuters. I'm not sorry, not Reuters. Go ahead.
Lonnie Cosette with the Japanese newspaper Yomiuri Shimbun. I'd like to ask you, you mentioned that you have seen some changes in the U.S.-Indonesia relationship. I wonder if you could elaborate on those changes and if you have seen, if you mean you've seen changes within this administration, during this administration.
Like I mentioned before, in the early years of the Clinton administration, we felt that some people would like to link said economic cooperation to, say, non-economic issues such as human rights or worker rights issue. Then they would like us to do certain things which, according to them, are the best. And when I say they, the administration, under pressure probably from NGOs, whether they're from the trade union or labor union or other associations. Like Ambassador Massa said, we would like, to discuss all problems with the United States, but it should not be made public in the sense that we are the culprit and that we should, improve our records, etc., etc. We would like to improve everything that an improvement is necessary in our either human rights records or worker rights records. Now, in the last year and so, we discern a change in this policy, that U.S. administration shows more understanding of our problems, and we have also done quite a lot in order to, reach agreement as to what should be done. There is a gradual change in the approach of the U.S. government to Indonesia, and we welcome that very much indeed.
More questions? Yeah, Gene.
Excellency, where does Indonesia stand today, since Indonesia is described as changing, on the ongoing debate about whether multi-party democracy is a luxury for developing countries, and is the United States going too far in trying to draw the blueprint for other countries' democracies?
Well, like I said, the United States now has not tried to impose their will, their concept of, say, either democracy or other things on Indonesia. They have been discussing this, and we welcome that very much indeed. And as I know, we have also our democracy, but the implementation of the democracy probably varies from that in the United States. And we would like to exchange views, to exchange experiences. That's why, like I said in my speech, we have here now 18,000 students, and some 60,000 Indonesians have enjoyed higher training at higher institutions in the United States, and they come back with new ideas. And well, there is a German saying, "Prüft alles und behaltet das Beste." It means examine everything and take over what is positive from every culture, and that is our slogan, When we think that there are positive aspects of your way of life, we would like to take them over. And it is up to our people to evaluate all these things. That's why we think that exchange of students, for example, is very important indeed. And that's why also we welcome this U.S.-Indonesia society, which promotes the relations among people, among Indonesians and the American people.
You mentioned workers' rights a couple of times. Could you elaborate on some of the areas in which you feel there's disagreement between U.S. NGOs or trade organizations and the Indonesian government?
Well, when I arrived here about 3 years ago, there was a dispute because apparently there are complaints by some NGOs like Human Rights Watch Asia and an arm of the AFL-CIO, which claim that the Indonesian government has not done enough to improve the rights and the conditions of American workers. And then they ask the U.S. government through the U.S. Trade Representative Office to withdraw the so-called GSP if Indonesia did not conform to the wishes of the United States government. Then we entered into negotiations, and we tried then to sort out the problems the United States would like to change. And in some cases, we think that even for the purpose, even without American pressure, we have been doing all these things. For example, minimum wages. Now, regularly, we have been increasing minimum wages of our people. Of course, the wages there are still much, much lower than here. But you have to take into account the stage of economic development. We are still much, much poorer than the United States. Then we exchange views, and we would like also to learn from your people how to improve if they think it is necessary. For example, now most Indonesian laborers, or let's say all laborers, are free to negotiate collective labor agreement with their managers. Thus, these things have been going on in Indonesia.
Mr. Wilson, I think you get the final question.
I wonder if I could just revisit an earlier question, which is whether you think the entire Lippo affair in America has damaged the image of Indonesia. I mean, we had during the election campaign, Senator Dole came out after that affair and accused you of brutal repression in East Timor. I mean, do you now sort of look back on this whole affair and?
Well, I adhere to the so-called positive thinking. You know, now that this affair has been made public, well, more and more Americans are acquainted with Indonesia. They know now where Indonesia lies, and they know that there are some billionaires in Indonesia who are generous with donations, etc. But we think that there is a negative impact in the sense that, as you know, whether explicitly or implicitly, some people claim that the donations by some Indonesians have influenced the U.S. policy towards Indonesia, which is not true, I said. And we could imagine, I hope not, but we could imagine that some administration people would like to take a distance from Indonesia because of this implied or explicit accusation as a consequence of these donations. We hope that it's not the case, but it could happen. And like I said, we have nothing to do with it, but unfortunately these things happen, and there is this negative impact.
Can I just clarify one thing?
Surely.
Yeah.
When you said that Indonesia kind of understands that Bishop Bello was awarded the Peace Prize, but you cannot understand why would Mr. Ramos Horta be also awarded the Nobel Peace Prize?
Why sorry,
When you say that Indonesia understands, can understand why Bishop Bello was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh, no, Bishop Bello, Horta.
But you don't quite see how did Horta get it, right?
Yeah, we cannot understand why Horta got it.
What do you think was the motivation of the Nobel Peace Prize? Were they up to get you, to cause you embarrassment? Do they want to cause trouble in East Timor? So what do you think their motivations were then?
Well, you should ask them what the motivation is. It is very difficult for me, to guess. They have their own criteria, their own purposes. We don't know.
But don't you think that there must be a good reason why they did so, other than embarrass you?
Well, they must have a reason, but what the reason is, I don't know.
So in your view, they're just plainly wrong?
Let's put it this way, we cannot understand what kind of criteria they use in order to arrive at the choice of Ramos Horta for peace Nobel Prize, peace.
So maybe they think that the self-determination issues it talks about, it's part of the solution. Would you agree with that?
Well, for sure, as you know, if you talk about peace, then understandably you expect a man of peace. Bello, yes, but Horta, who instigated the riots which led to civil war, that such a person, get the Nobel Prize, Peace Nobel Prize. That is what we cannot understand. Thank you.
Ambassador Siregar, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank all your ambassadorial assistants, too. And please don't forget to add your name to the sign-in sheet outside if you haven't already.
For more international figures, in a few moments, the Chinese Defense Minister, Chur Hao-tien,